Good morning to the Caron YouTube audience, and wow, to a very full room this morning. I'm excited to be with you, and also to anybody who might be watching on live stream around the campus. I come across topics weekly that have evolved as part of my practice as the principal presider for the chapel service, and this morning's topic is one I have addressed a number of times, but many times when I've come across this topic, I've been reminded of a piece of my journey in relation to the word freedom. And I've even made mention of this in previous talks on this subject, but I had this aspiration today to kind of tell the whole story. And a sidebar about that is my appreciation of the word freedom is informed a great deal by an experience I had in seminary, moving out of atheism, going to seminary in my recovery, and becoming a pastor with a officially Protestant denomination ordination, but also being intently committed to welcome to persons of diverse faith or even no belief whatsoever. I usually strive to avoid very specifically theological presentations within a particular tradition, but I'm going to set that aside for a second. A true confession. When I was a young boy, I was a brat. And none of you were, of course. And I had a little bit of a rebellious streak in me. And so I think the word freedom meant for me, now in thinking about it, freedom from parental oversight. And it was freedom to party. It was freedom to stay up late. It was freedom to go and come as I pleased. Things like, you're grounded or whatever, where my justice, freedom stuff would like flare. And I remember saying to my dad, "That's not fair." And this was the naive way in which the word freedom might have been a part of what I spoke about. And I think I carried that into young adulthood in large measure. And it wouldn't be until I was in seminary that I was really spun about how to think about the word freedom in a very different way. And then when I had this experience I'm going to tell you about, it made me sheepish to think back on how long it took me to catch on that the people who have defended our freedoms through history were not defending my bratness. They were not defending an anarchist, nobody can tell me what to do. That's not what, when the French talk about liberté, égalité, fraternité, or we talk about national freedoms in our discussion, Thomas Jefferson and others through the generations of our American heritage who have fought for our freedoms were not defending that kind of, I would call, insolent rebelliousness. But what were they defending is where I want to end up. And so for that, a sidebar. I was in seminary, the atheist learning about Jesus, and several people in that process had profound effect on me. One was a guy named Kendall Solon. You'll remember I mentioned Kendall many times. And I'm pleased to say Kendall and I, social media today are a curse and a blessing, but one of the blessings for me is I'm friended with Kendall, and when he has a birthday or I have a birthday, we exchange little messages, and I know he affected thousands and thousands of students in his years as a professor, and I'm grateful to be one of them. And Kendall was teaching us about what was called, in that context, systematic theology, which is the attempt to construct a coherent narrative and argument for one's faith. It can be a really tricky thing. And Kendall's a philosopher and a theologian, and funny mix, nerd, and yet a gentle and beautiful man, and a gentle and beautiful nerd then. So this happened in a day in my life when I was in class and Kendall was at this modest podium and he was talking to those of us in this course. And he offered me an insight, which I've never forgotten, which is that the biblical witness in the Christian tradition can be thought of as a single overarching story, even though it's a mishmash of a bunch of types of literature, but that there's a overarching plot and a subplot that when you think about Scripture in that way, it can be really illuminating. And the 4 words that go with the plot and subplot thing for Kendall were that the plot of history is creation to consummation. Interesting. So it starts with, in the beginning was the Word and the chaos and then creation and then the Adam and Eve story and all that sort of stuff. And its consummation is all the way at the other end of this tome that we call the Bible, in which the lion is laying down with the lamb and the people are streaming in from all the diverse places, and it's a big, I often tease about this word, but it's a kumbaya moment, right? And so the end of the story is what was projected at the beginning of the story, which is it all works out. It's like a nice Hallmark movie. It all works out in the end, which should be reassuring to those of us who are stuck in the middle here. And that was the original design of the story, as it starts at its very beginning and it reaches its fulfillment. But in the middle of the story, it quickly becomes more complex because of the 2 other words that capture the subplot, which is fall and redemption. So if you think about the sequence of the story narrative, it goes creation, fall, redemption, consummation. And I'm sorry to do seminary professor today, but please hang in there with me. So I think that turns out to be very, very helpful for me, because along the way with that there's a piece about freedom. But let me explain the fall redemption thing. So it may be obvious, but it sort of introduces itself in those narratives with the tree and the serpent and this fruit that we depict as an apple. But that metaphorically or symbolically represents our brokenness, right? The introduction in the story of our inability to live into the finish of the story. So suddenly we're not able to live in harmony with one another, in harmony with the planet, in harmony with the beasts, and in harmony with the Creator. And I still think we don't do that terribly well, but that's that's what happens in this way of understanding the biblical narrative in this overarching way, is that the whole of it, from the very after like the few opening chapters and before the few ending chapters, is about this drama of a difficulty of the characters in the story to live into their purpose, which is mutual blessing. And I love that phrase. I got that from Kendall. That our function and our purpose is mutual blessing. For me to be blessed by you selfishly, and for me to be a blessing to you. And I think I love this vision of what I'm here for, is blessing and to receive and offer it. And I know we have persons of the Jewish faith in the room. This is very cogent with the Jewish witness and the Torah, and I think it's probably something that we could find harmony with in the other wisdom traditions of the world. But I learned it in relation to what the Christians call the Bible, and the fulfillment fix of the brokenness in the Christian witness has to do with the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus as it affects the people who follow him. And I'm not going to get specific into that more than just to say that that's how this story finds its way towards its evolving resolution. But I want to now divert to the subject of at hand of freedom, and to say that in the backdrop of this idea that we live in a world that has a hope and that is out of alignment with its hope of mutual blessing, we have clearly 2 kinds of freedom. We have the freedom that makes it possible for us to fight against love and blessing. And we have the freedom to align ourselves with blessing. So, put in the vernacular, we have freedom to be a jerk. We have the freedom to be loving and beneficent and whole and virtuous and sober and I believe that addiction manifests as an inhibitor of the fulfillment of our lives. And one of the ways I like to think about it is as an enslavement. So Johnny Walker became my master. And in that, I became, much of my behavior looked to you all like it wasn't mutual blessing at all. It was me trying to get mine, and it hurt tons of other people. So the person who suffers from a substance use disorder has lost freedom by exercising freedom. It's a paradox, right? It's like, I can do heroin, I can snort, I'm a social crack user, and that becomes a lie quickly, because all of a sudden, there's an old AA expression which I think is illuminating, even though it's very specifically, it's patriarchal and very specific around alcohol. But the AA expression is, first the man takes a drink, then the drink takes a drink, then the drink takes the man. And I think that is poetically spot on. That what happened to me was at some point early on, I was like, sure, I'll try that, thinking I was exercising my freedom, when all of a sudden, I'm sad to say it, 13 years old, I was using every day. And so the drink had taken the boy, not even the man. And I didn't realize I had lost freedom. In fact, here I was thinking freedom is like telling my parents they couldn't tell me I got busted for weed. And I'm like, well, you people drink. What's the difference between my weed and your cocktails? I was such a brat. And so out of alignment with what I think of as the holiness of life, the sacredness of me and the sacredness of you, and what we can be at our very best. So freedom is not, in my mind anymore, this childish notion of abandonment of all allegiances. Now it's like, what do I want freedom for? And what do I want freedom from? Become the questions. I want freedom from active addiction. And I want freedom for love and mutual blessing. I want to, one day at a time, be able to not be held captive in the way that I was. And that empowers in me. So when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, way before I met Kendall Solon, one of the things that came across my radar early on in my recovery was this document that's called The Promises. And if you don't know about the document or whatever, it's fine, but I'll tell you what hit me of it. The promises are from a particular page or 2 pages in the AA Manifesto, which is a thing called the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And as the Big Book explains the 12 steps that are on the wall over there as a path of sobriety and recovery, I would say a path to mutual blessing and out of hell. Along the way, as one makes it to the 9th out of the 12 steps, this manifesto suggests that a variety of things become evident in the recovering person's life, which I think is very true as long as you're not just white-knuckling it, as long as you're not merely stopping drinking. But if you allow this freedom from active addiction to manifest itself in a new kind of transformed life, then one of the promises, and there are a bunch of them, like freedom, financial insecurity is one, knowing the new peace, that's another one. But one of them is a new freedom and a new happiness. And I didn't have a clue what that meant. At 28 years old, coming into AA, I was like, a new freedom? Like, does that mean Maserati instead of, I was that naive and that self-centered and that materialistic that I thought and when they said beyond our wildest dreams, I thought that was a more beautiful significant other and a fatter wallet and and all the indulgences I want of any sort of kind. That was so not the new freedom that I have found, and not beyond my wildest dreams has turned out to be dreams I would have never had. I would have never had the dream to be in this role. And I'm doing pretty well on time, so I'll indulge myself in one small story about that. So years ago, I was serving as a pastor in a beach community, and when I came in the morning, there was a napkin from a pizza place around the corner taped to the door of the church, and it said, Jack Abel. And I took the napkin off the door and took it up to my office and opened it, and I started laughing, because right away I understood what the deal was, because it said, oh my God, is this really you? ? Shannon, and a phone number. So Shannon had been my younger brother's girlfriend in years when we were both lost in active addiction and living the living hell of an addict life. And Shannon had been just as much in the mess as I was. And then she came into town to get pizza, pulled up in front of the church, and there was a sign and it said Jack Abel, senior pastor. And she was like, no way. So I was like, this is gonna be fun. I dialed the phone and she's like, hi. And I'm like, oh my God, Shannon, is this really you? And she goes, Jack? And we started laughing. And I said, yes, it's really me. And she goes, how? And I said, well, it all starts with me getting sober. And she said, wait a minute, just stop. She said, I just celebrated 7 years. So Shannon and Jack both have experienced this extraordinary freedom. I mean, if you think a church pastor is free, I'm going to change your mind about that. Let's talk after the service. But because I constantly bind myself, right? One of the great freedoms of my life is to be a husband. And that might sound odd to some of you who think of marriage differently than I do, but my marriage enables the flourishing in my life. Directly based upon my willingness to not flirt and to not stray. And that enables me to have a kind of existence that I treasure. Another expression around this idea of how nuanced the idea of freedom is in recovery, that's a beautiful thing. I just heard, again, I've heard it before, but to think of recovery as the choice between risking everything to keep one thing or giving up one thing to make everything possible. And this is what I understand as the invitation that is before you today. Whether you're a family member who is just potentially in some ways weirdly as addicted to this mess as your loved one is, that may not be yet clear to you, but stay in FEP. Or you're the person with the wristband who is here for substance use disorder care. You have been trapped in what I think of as a form of captivity. And in order to find freedom from that, you must choose what you will follow. Because the antithesis is not anarchy. That's still, in my mind, a kind of enslavement. But I'm going to offer the notion that we can seek to find good authority and healthy covenant, and that's what is how we're meant to live. That's what the fullness of the life, that's what the new freedom and new happiness is, to live in harmony with ourselves and with one another and with the God of our understanding. And shed a certain bratness, rebellious thing that may be very familiar and been a safety mechanism for most of us for most of our lives. So I don't know if you want to be free in that way, but I do. And free to love, free to laugh, free to live, free to hope, free to be. Welcome home to that freedom towards which creation points. And that's redemption, right? That's redemption. This is our brokenness turned to good. invitation for us today. Thanks very much.